So it's a safe space, and we start off every session with a meditation, just to slow the day down. I can't speak for anyone else, but the last couple, I was in California for a month, had a great time, and I was in New Orleans working there as well, and finally got back to New York. And sometimes we just need to slow. So Rob, what we always do is just ask people to close their eyes. Everyone, just close your eyes for a second and just breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. I'm so excited to have my brother Rob Kenner with us today. I mean, you are in for a treat. He's one of our great writers and editors, and he'll break all that down. But let's just start breathing first, even as people are coming in. Just take a moment to just kind of clear our brains, set ourselves for the week. I'm so glad we shifted this from Tuesdays to Sundays. So this is a great way to start our week, just this session. You know, all of us who come together each week. Just breathe for a second. Please mute if you have noise in the background. Please mute if you have noise in the background. Just keep breathing, y'all. Just a few more seconds. We're gonna get started. Those who are new, welcome, welcome, welcome. And yes, we will definitely have the videos up of every session. Again, it was my bad about last week. That was my screw up on the technical side, but we've got that corrected now. Everything will be up. So let's do 3 together. In through the nose, deep breath in. Make some noise, push it out. Let's do it again, in. Push it out. One last big breath in, positive energy. Let go of stuff that is toxic, that does not serve you. Push it out. When you're ready, let's just open our eyes and get started here, because we got a phenomenal writer. Hey, y'all, if you can turn your cameras on. If not, it's cool. Hey, Joyce, I see you again. Hey, Mitzi. First, before I introduce my brother, Rob Kenner, let's just talk about last week with Lauren Sanders, which I thought was an incredible session. Just want to get a quick feel from you all, what you got from it. What were some things that went through your head? Have you been writing since last week based on the conversation, you know, that we had with Lauren, you know, all of us, because we all got to ask her questions throughout as well. Anyone just want to start? Just some reflections about last week first. Lauren Sanders, our guest writer. Anyone? I'm not used to no hands.
You know, hi, Kevin. I was muted when you said hi earlier. So
hey, Mitzi. Hey.
Hi, how you doing, Kevin? You know, what stuck to me is just like how the oneness that we all are, that we're all going through this, and we think we're alone with our behaviors and what we're doing and how we're, you know, what we want to write and how we want to get it done. So when we listen to her story, you know, and for her to share it with everyone, it's just you know, just to let us know to keep going. And
that's right, to keep going no matter what. And what I appreciate, if I can piggyback off what you just said, you know, she said several things. I'm a woman, I'm Jewish, I happen to be a queer woman. And so she represented many identities. She talked about her journey of discovering herself and how important that was to her work and the work that she feels is most important for her. And I think, you know, it's intentional, you all. I believe that, you know, diversity, real equity, real inclusion needs to be intentional. So as you can see from the lineup that we have, the 12 writers, they're very different backgrounds, you know, because I think we all need to be clear who we are and write from our perspectives, you know, if we want to do that and not be ashamed of it, as she was talking about, as other writers have been talking about. Also be open to learning from people who are different than us as well. Anyone else out there want to speak?
thank you.
Anyone? Thoughts about last week?
I'll share. Hi.
Hey, who's speaking?
Hello, Stacy.
Hey,
This
Stacy.
is my first time here. Just really happy to be in this space and this sharing. Thank you for creating this. What's stayed with me after last week was just the way she talked about characters and their voices. And as a writer, you know, I've been prompted, you know, like to write and given, you know, gifts of ideas, and they've kind of like, I've let them simmer in the background. And I think this past week, I just gave myself more permission to let those voices like be in communication with each other and with myself. And I just really felt like, I caught the writing bug, and I'm happy about that. So
I'm very happy about that as well. Welcome,
yeah,
Stacey. And where are you
thank
based out of, Stacey?
I'm in Harlem.
Uptown,
Yes, yes.
uptown. I'm in Brooklyn, so we're cousins. We're cousins.
All right, fam. Thank you.
And I see that we have MJ in Japan. We have someone all the way from who's from California originally. See you, MJ, in the chat. Welcome, welcome. I believe it's about 6 a.m. in Japan. Is that right, MJ? Where are you? I just saw you.
It's 7 o'clock out here, 7:11. I wake up at about 5 every day. So we're out here.
Man, what city are you in? Are you in Tokyo, Osaka, somewhere else?
I lived in Tokyo before, but I live in Yokohama right now. I also lived in Kumamoto and Hitoyoshi and a lot of other places here. So this is year 3.
Oh, wow. Wow. And I've been to Japan. So konnichiwa and welcome to the group. We appreciate you.
Domo arigato. Ohayo gozaimasu. It's morning time. So
it's morning time. That's right. That
before
anyone who's never been to Japan is lit to me. I just like next level. Please, if you can in your lifetime, get to Japan. I've never seen a train system like that. That's the first thing I think of, and just how clean it is, you know what I mean, and efficient.
You got to go to Korea. You say you got to go places on the map. I lived in Korea for 7 years, so you got to go to Korea too.
Oh,
Korea's
wow.
train system is better.
Is that right?
My personal opinion.
That's on my list. And thank you so much, MJ. I appreciate you. Anyone else want to talk about last week?
I do.
You got from last week? David. Hey, David Martin.
Hey, how's everyone? The only words I know in Japanese, I think, are Ohayo gozaimasu.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
That's correct. Ohayo gozaimasu. Good job.
I felt like I was a fail for last week from writing assignment. And I still had a lot of the outer external factors that were bombarding me sort of to address my attentions to them. And then I have a lot of things that are competing, certifications, applications, jobs, the things that I haven't really felt like I could prioritize other than. But I wanted to also acknowledge that, to be honest about myself, but also just say Lauren was amazing. I was glad she was queer and in the space and talking about living your truth. And it inspired me to look at things that I may not be acknowledging, and of spaces that I feel like awkward in still at this age. But looking at those as writing prompts too. I think one of the writing prompts was, somebody help me, who was your audience, or who do you speak to?
Yeah.
And I think that it's really broad. Sometimes when I think of the different spaces I'm in. So I think I have started feeling like I should speak for what I want to say, as opposed to speak for my audience or who I'm speaking to. So these are some of the thoughts that came up for me during the week. And then I'm working through a PT with my knee surgery. So I'm in. So that's just it for me. Yeah.
Well, prayers and meditations to you, Dave, with the PT, with the knee surgery piece. And, folks are posting in chat as you were speaking. I forgot the questions came up last week. Thank you, Carl, and other folks. Who are your people, Glory? Thank you for saying that. Who are your people? Who are we writing for? But I mean, how many of y'all would agree that we also have to make sure we're writing for ourselves first and foremost, and hopefully what we write will touch other people? Anyone want to jump in and talk about that really quickly? Anyone?
Well, definitely writing.
Who's speaking? Mitzi, I see you.
I definitely feel that I'm writing for myself, because even this Will Smith issue right now, I something came up for me and that I needed to process, and I'm writing about it. And I just realized I don't have to write it quick and share it to the media for any attention or anything like that. It's just something that I need to process. And then when we get to know that all our voices are worthy, then you go ahead and share it. But it doesn't have to be, because people are going to say and do what they want to do. So it can't be about people. It has to be about, about what I'm processing. And then maybe somebody, then like I said earlier, we're not alone. So maybe someone else will hear it too.
Yeah. I think a lot of someone else was here. I mean, when I think about people like, Baldwin, Bell Hooks, various folks, it could be argued they were writing from their very unique personal perspectives, but it was so powerful what they wrote that it ended up touching millions of people. And so I do think that we have to come from our spaces where we are. And I like the word that you said, processing, because we've heard that word a lot the last couple of weeks, obviously, Mitzi, but how many of y'all feel like you're grappling at times with just trying to get stuff out of your head? And just really quickly, one or two people, Cheryl, anyone who wants to speak, Alma, any of you, like, what is your process to get it out of your head to the paper or the computer or wherever you write at? What's your process? Anyone?
Well, the best thing is to just get a pen and write. But I think sometimes that it's just so much more lengthy and more detailed in my head than I get it on the paper sometimes. I get to a point where I've already written everything, and I really should be, I feel like it should be longer. I feel like it should be more detailed. So kind of what I think.
Okay. Did you want to say something, Alma, or Bill Holmes? I see Sandra. Anyone else want to speak? I'm just looking, I saw faces. So I was wondering.
Yeah.
Bill? Okay.
This is Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I kind of agree with Cheryl. It's just like writing, just do it, as Nike would say. I missed last week's presentation session, but I did attend Friday Night Writes, and Dara had brought up a book that I went out and bought yesterday, Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones. And I just started going through that. I'm halfway through it right now. But it's just, for me, it was just like writing without expectations. Like sometimes, like I'll start out with like an intention, like, okay, I'm going to write 1,000 words today, or I'm going to start a short story today, and I fall short. And I'll just like do anything but do the actual writing. And so I kind of told myself, I think I need to just go into it with writing without any expectations, no intentions, pressure. Don't put pressure on yourself. Just write, just engage in the process and just do it.
Yes. I think one of the things that was striking to me, and was Sandra, were you here? So Sandra Lima, I just saw you. Did you put your hand back down? Are you good? Okay. Remember, Lauren Sanders talked about the fact that she's always had a full-time job throughout all this process, this journey. And so there's different ways to be a writer. A lot of us think that you just have to write. And she's like, that actually has helped her with her discipline. Anyone recall her saying that last week? That actually helped her. She got up early in the morning. She's like, let me get this out of the way. I got my day job. I see you, Lajira. And then we're going to bring Dara Kalima on to close us out, talking about Friday Night Writes. And then we're going to introduce Rob Kinner. Hey, Lajira, how are you?
Yeah, I saw it. I'm quite well. Thanks for asking. I think my process is, I'm fortunate because I have all these crazy ass characters to write about. So, and they all have something to say. So, and they're always saying what I want to say. So for me, it's just sitting down and letting them talk. And that's great if you have a whole bunch of characters, but sometimes people don't. So my thing is just to write, get it on paper, get it on a computer, and go back and edit it later. Because I think some of the times, one of the problems we have is we do a lot of self-editing. And that's something that doesn't work if you really, really want to write well. Just, you got to get it out first.
Yes.
As somebody said, all first drafts are shit. So therefore, let's just spew this all over the page and then go clean it up.
That's right. Thank you, Lajira. Thank you. Magical Mary Lou. I love that name. Magical Mary Lou. Hey.
Hello, it's my first time. My friend Sean Hill. Happy birthday!
Happy birthday, Sean Hill, if you're out there.
Yeah, but I'm here to celebrate, and I'm writing a teaching memoir. So this is actually really, because I'm in bed from knee surgery this week, and yeah, this is like perfect timing that he invited me to this.
You see David's face. He's like, he's there with you.
Thank you. I got some love.
I have a whole love. But my question is, because I'm really new, so my friend is a solo teaching artist coach, but she has a full writing meditation, like 102 of them on YouTube, and it helps you get things out of your head and on the paper. So would it be a resource to you if I put the link in there? I mean, it doesn't cost anything. It's just a YouTube.
We share resources in the chat. We're saving these chats. We also post on our Facebook group, Kevin Powell's Writing Workshop. We're sharing information for writers, resources, grants, fellowships, residencies, all of it. We want this to be a clearinghouse of information, definitely. Is that cool?
Okay, so I'll put that.
And I
Thank
wish you
you.
well with the healing process, Magical Mary Lou. That's a dope name,
Thank
Magical Mary Lou. Yes. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
I want to bring in Rob. I'm sorry. I want to bring in my brother, Rob Kenner. Rob, I'm not going to read the bio. I'm just going to say he's a dope human being. First,
before you go in, do you want me to say Friday Night Writes?
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry. There you are. DK, please introduce yourself. Sorry.
So, hello, everyone. My name is Dara Kalima. I am one of the people who sit here and do the things in the back behind to help Kevin. And so we have Friday Night Writes, and it was actually brought to us, but I'm going to mess up your name now. Glory V. Glory V. Yes, thank you. So she suggested it. We decided to implement it. We meet every Friday just to write. It is your time to write. There are really very few rules. The only rules are how we communicate about what has been shared, because we don't want to deflate egos, because egos are far more sensitive than we even realize. So other than that, we spend about 90 minutes writing. We spend about 20 to 30 minutes talking, but it is about writing, having that practice, because if we don't have that practice, if we don't meet in community, if we leave it up to ourselves, half of us are not going to do anything, right? It's like that diet we started at New Year's and where we are in April. Remember that? How's that going, right? So we meet on Fridays so that we can continue to have a community and write in fellowship. And the practice is yours. The practice is whatever you choose to do, but we want to be able to support that. So I dropped the link before, we'll drop it again, and just join us on Friday Night Writes. We are there every Friday until the end of the workshops to foster a community. We play some jazz, we sit down quiet and write. We also provide prompts based upon whoever is speaking each week, so that should you not have a starting point, you can start there. Or if you're working on your own project, do that. If you just want to read during that time, do that. But this is that 2-hour window so that you don't have an excuse to not be able to do that. We're helping you edge out that time. So that's what this is. And then hopefully when this ends and until we can meet again, you will have that practice started. And that's the whole point, is having the writing practice together, because we all need it. So that's that. Join us Friday Night Writes.
And Dara, this is for all levels of writers. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And like, you can share, you don't have to share. Sometimes we just talk about what happened on Sunday. Sometimes we'll talk about where our practice is. We'll talk about what we're just working on without sharing our work at all, where there's no pressure. It is really chill. It is whatever you need, you take from it, you add into it. We're just trying to gather to write, because I know I do have a writing practice, but my writing practice is usually best when it's in community. Again, because, if you leave it up to me, I'm not going to necessarily do it. So when people are gathered, even if it's 1 or 2, we are dedicated to being together so that we can do that during that time.
Thank you so much.
Anyone can come join together.
No, thank you. And thank you for leading us on Friday Night Writes. We really appreciate you for doing it. And please Google Dara Kalima and check out her books as well, her work as well. And again, we're supporting each other. And so please, there are folks in our group who have books, and let's continue to support each other who are out there putting the work out there. So I want to introduce Rob Kenner. I was going to say that I don't want to read his bio. He's very important to me. He's a dear friend. He was actually my main editor for many of my pieces, including many of the cover stories that I wrote for Vibe magazine back in the 90s. Rob is a writer, he's an editor, he's a filmmaker. My gosh, he's a New York Times best-selling author. Wrote a terrific biography of Nipsey Hussle. Rest in peace, Nipsey Hussle. And I just want to bring him on because Rob, what we do, I'm going to spotlight Rob now, is just talk, and just talk about this process of being a writer. There you are, Rob Kenner. Let's give Rob Kenner a warm round of applause, please, y'all. You can unmute for a second. Welcome, Rob. Welcome.
Kevin, this is so much fun. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to be speaking with you today. As you mentioned, we go all the way back to day one at Vibe.
Yeah.
And I know your journey as a writer goes way before that. But, we intersected in that first meeting at Vibe magazine, and you had a lot of ideas. I remember from the very first meeting, you were like exploding with ideas that you wanted to write about. And that was such a blessing to be brought together under this crazy idea that Quincy Jones had of doing like a major magazine about hip hop, which people really did not believe would work. There was a lot of people at Time Inc. that thought it was just like, you know, hip hop. Do hip hop fans want to read long articles and profiles? You know, do, you know, there was all that kind of conversation going on. And, you know, I think the work that we did together and all the great minds who were brought together at Vibe definitely changed America, changed popular culture. You know, you see now, like we had the Super Bowl halftime show with a lot of the artists that appeared on the cover of Vibe, you know, it's like completely shifted American culture, and I think paved the way for hip hop to be recognized as the force that it is. And anyway, it's just cool that you're keeping this weekly session, and I'm really looking forward to chopping it up with you, talking about works for the future and some of our memories of things we worked on in the past. And I don't know the format of your, you know, sessions, but I'm gathering that it's very interactive. Looks like you have a lot of practicing writers in the room. There's some folks that I recognize and a lot of new faces. So I'm just excited to get into it.
Rob, can you turn your volume up just a little bit if that's possible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And folks, just so y'all know, Rob and I work together. I'm looking at it literally on my wall are 3 cover stories, including one that had Suge Knight, Snoop Dogg, Tupac Shakur, and Dr. Dre on the cover. We literally worked together on all the major Tupac stuff at Vibe magazine. So a lot of the stuff that I did, I mean, when I say he's an excellent editor, I want you all to really ask questions about editing when we get to that process, because Rob, what I learned from Rob was just how seamless it is, to how editing can seem seamless. Like a lot of us, I hate to lose words. LaJara's right. You just got to get it out of you. But then how do you get it to that place? But Rob, I want to, before we even talk about the art of writing, I mean, I want to go back, you know, for folks who don't know, tell us where you're from and how did you come to writing in the first place? How did you come to books, to literature, to the arts in the first place?
So thank you for that question. I was born in Santa Barbara, California. My dad was a professor of English at UCSB at the time. So I grew up in a house where, you know, we had a lot of books. We had, you know, those refrigerator magnets of the poetry, like there's different words and you can play with the words on the fridge. It was a part of our life, you know, it was like, you know, like alphabet cereal, you know, spelling words in the spoon in your milk, you know. So writing and reading were something that I saw around me all the time. My father's name is Hugh Kenner. He is my first and best teacher. And, you know, I dedicated the book, The Marathon Don't Stop, to him. And he's no longer on this planet. But weirdly enough, the book ended up being published on my late mother's birthday. So it's very much like a manifestation of, you know, my parents and you know, the respect for the written word. And one of the things I wanted to say too in this conversation that happened just a bit ago about who is your audience, right? I think one of the things that it was very true, what you said, you write for yourself first, but then one of the things we do by writing is we create footprints on the sands of time, and we never know who's going to come across those footprints. So your audience is actually unknown to you, and you just have to be able to put it out there. I mean, the stories that we did at Vibe, I'm sure you can attest that you were surprised by some of the reactions, you know, and how much it ended up meaning to people, and not just things published in that magazine, but, you know, anytime someone writes something, we have no idea who it's going to touch, you know? So my thing is, you know, our relationship was always, you know, as writer and editor, but I want to also say that every writer can be an editor for another writer, and every writer needs an editor, you know, because once you put something down on paper, you have no idea. Like, you have the ideas in your mind, you know what you want to say, you know the feeling you have, you know the experiences that are inspiring you to sit down and do this, or the deadline that's forcing you to do it, or whatever, but you have it in your mind. You put marks on a piece of paper or on a computer screen, and someone else has to read those marks and decipher it and have it come to life in their mind. And it's only when you turn it over, when you let it go, that you actually understand whether it's working or not. You know what I'm saying? So that's just something that I think about a lot when I'm trying to write myself, because it's very different editing someone's work and just starting with that blank page and writing. But it's all to do with communication. And so you do write for yourself because it's in you, but it has to touch someone outside of your brain. Like for the connection to happen, you have to put the words down in a way that are intelligible to another person and to evoke some feeling or some, emotion or knowledge in them. So
what did you read as a child? Like what stood out to you up, like say from age 5 to 10 first? Let's start there. What stuck out to you? Stuff that you came across, reading, film, anything in the arts, anything. What stuck out to you that really?
I love music, honestly. I remember some of my earliest memories are putting a needle on a turntable. My big brothers, John and Michael, had big record collections, and I would play like everything from, the Monkees to Glenn Campbell to Rolling Stones, whatever records were in the house, I was just putting the needle on the turntable. I love that. But my dad would always read a book of poems called A Bad Child's Book of Beasts. So it was like these humorous poems about like misbehaving kids and like animals. And, he would read the same poems over and over, and I would sometimes, remember them because they were funny, and they're all to do with like things that kids did to misbehave, and then, animals that would somehow like get involved in the story and sometimes, punish the kids that did bad stuff. So I don't know, that was just my early bedtime stories and things like that. But reading books, like actually a book that I remember reading early, I don't know, man. Like, I mean, all the Dr. Seuss stuff, I was reading that. I was reading Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Rabbit and all that stuff, just kids literature. But books that I read, then I read only like school assignments then, like Death Be Not Proud or Catcher in the Rye, 1984, Animal Farm. And I don't know, then at a certain point, I guess I started to get my own taste and develop things that I wanted to read because I wanted to read them. But honestly, music was always the thing I was more drawn to than, reading and writing is hard work. And I want to acknowledge that for everybody who's in this room, respect to you for doing this craft, because it is a craft and it's a discipline, and it's something that you have to sometimes really force yourself to sit in that chair and do the work. And we all have different tricks. I mean, for me, one of the things about writing is kind of lonely. It's like a solitary thing, right? So you cut yourself off from human contact. That's one of the things that's fun about working in a magazine, because at least you do it together, right? And like when you would go off and do an interview with Tupac and come back and be like, oh my God, you'll never believe what we talked about. And, it's this and this and this. And we have a 25,000 word transcript. We got to get it down to 3,000 words by 2 days from now. What are we going to do? We're up around the clock on the phone doing the edits, or in the office late. So that's fun. That's like a social experience. But honestly, like to write in general is a solitary experience. Like you have to go into your head and you have to kind of like be in that zone. So I do things to trick myself. Like I'll put on a piece of music and put it on repeat, usually instrumental. So I don't actually notice how much time is passing, but then sometimes you look out the window and it's going dark and the light, and, sunset, sunrise reminds you that time is passing. You have to remind yourself to sleep sometimes because you get in that zone.
When did you, because I know the blessing of Quincy Jones and Vibe was that we all were pretty much under 30 years old in our 20s when we were doing that. So, there was obviously a window before that. When did you first say, I'm a writer? Like, how did you come to that process?
I was like the guy that edited the school magazine, not the newspaper.
High school or college or both?
This is high school.
Okay.
I did the high school magazine that, you know, the newspaper wasn't that interesting to me, but like the magazine, that we had a magazine at the school I went to in Baltimore. And so I was the editor of that, and I was the editor of like the
So you moved
yearbook.
around a bit. Was it because of your father's academic career?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
a professor brat. It's like being an
Okay.
army brat. You know, we moved around. So like I lived in Ireland for a year and lived in different places where he would be like visiting as a professor. And but Baltimore became the place I lived until I went to college at in Chicago, at University of Chicago. And coming out of Chicago, I didn't really do much extracurricular work at college because it was really a hard school, and I, you know, had to really work to get through it. And I also decided about midway through college that I would never go to grad school or any other educational system until I really was doing it for a specific purpose. Like I studied English language and literature, and it was a good thing to do, but I'm glad I finished it. But I also just wanted to get to work after that. I didn't want to go back and study more, you know? And so my ambition going to New York City was I'm going to work at Rolling Stone because I love music. I wanted to tell stories about popular music, right? And so I tried to do that. I didn't get any callbacks on my, you know, ambition to do that, but I ended up working at an art magazine called Art and Antiques, and I was an editorial assistant and typesetter. So I worked with, this was before computer publishing, and I actually worked with the editor to create the final version of the story that would be pasted up on pages and, you know, actual like printed out on film and sliced up with an X-Acto blade. And it was weird. It was like a physical publishing process, not like the digital world we live in now. And yeah, when Vibe came along, when I heard that Quincy Jones was starting this magazine called Vibe, I was like, oh no, that's what I need to do. So I started bombarding the editor, who I read in a trade publication called Magazine Week that Jonathan Van Meter was going to be the editor-in-chief of this new magazine called Vibe that Quincy Jones was starting. And I said, I bet they're not going to do reggae and dancehall the way they should, you know, because that was my like super passion. I was working at a record shop at the time also. I was at Art and Antiques during the week and DJing at night in reggae clubs and working in this reggae record shop on East 7th Street called Irie. So I was collecting vinyl and getting really into the dancehall, and hip hop and dancehall are kind of connected at that time. Like Harris One and Shinehead were always popping in and out of the store, and you know, so it was not so different. But anyway, reggae has always been kind of misunderstood in American media, so I really wanted to write about Supercat, and I pitched a story about Supercat, if anybody remembers Dolly My Baby and all those records. And I eventually got the assignment to write that story about Supercat. And that was the issue that you wrote the cover story for what was then called Volume, right? The magazine wasn't even called Vibe at first. And your story was on Tretch from Naughty by Nature. And that was the first time I heard your name. And of course, by that time you were also on The Real World. And, you know, there's a lot going on in your world. And I was just excited to be in the mix of the magazine that got renamed Vibe at the last minute. The issue came out 92, and I guess it sold well enough that Time Inc. greenlit it, this crazy idea of doing a rap magazine. And a year later, we all were working there. I quit my job at Art and Antiques the second I got the offer. You know, I guess they liked my Supercat piece. Supercat's story was crazy because, you know, that was the thing. I'll tell you, and you can relate to this, Kevin. We don't write about artists that you know, like artists like Tretch weren't getting really thoughtful profiles written about them that much, right? You know, there wasn't like deep journalism being done, in my opinion. You know, there were a few, you know, people like Greg Tate were doing things, and, you know, Nelson George and Harry Allen. There were pioneers, Michael Gonzalez, you know, but you know, it wasn't like there were tons of thoughtful profiles of Tretch written, right? So you wrote that story, and I'm sure you were very protective of him. You loved Tretch, right? You wanted him to be presented well. And I felt the same way about Supercat. And that particular story, there was a lot going on around him at that time. And, you know, after the piece came out, I was actually really like stressed because you know, like the headline was "Wanted Dead or Alive," and there was all this drama in the story. And that wasn't the headline that I had originally intended on the story, and it kind of evolved, and that's what it came out as. And I was really kind of nervous to see Supercat after that story came out. And it was years later that I did see him, and I was like super nervous, but he, you know, he gave me the thumbs up after we spoke. But it was a stressful thing, you know, like we cared about the stuff we were doing so much. And
That's right.
you know, when it came out and thousands of people were reading it, it was a big responsibility to be able to stand behind it and say, yeah, that's what we meant, you know, because now it's like Instagram comments, people say all kinds of wild shit, and you can just get away with it. But at that time, I felt like you had to be able to like see the person you had written about and look them in the eye and say, yeah, this is what I think, and I stand behind this, you know.
It's funny, you know, I want to go back a bit because I think it's important, you know, if we could focus on a couple of things. How did living in a lot of different places impact the writer and editor you become? How do you feel the training that you got in high school and college, but also the early publications prior to Vibe, like how did it all shape who you became as a writer and editor, those different experiences?
Oh, these are good questions, Kevin. I think traveling around and having to fit in different situations is really helpful, and it definitely shaped my personality. You have to like, I mean, I went to school in Ireland in the middle, you know, this is in the 70s. The IRA was blowing up pubs at the time, and you know, it was kind of like a wild environment. And then I was this American kid with, you know, 10-year-old kids who had grown up learning Gaelic, which is like the Irish language that's written with a whole different alphabet. And I had to like be in Gaelic class with them. And, you know, it was like, you have to just size up the room and figure it out and adapt and like, you know, be yourself, but also like be respectful of your surroundings. And I think it helps you to be a good journalist because you're observant and you're taking cues from all sorts of unspoken things. And yeah, so that definitely shaped me a lot. And then the opportunity to work on the school magazine, to see like a story that you typed up, then, you know, have page proofs, and then have it be like on the principal's desk or your friend's, you know, book bag. It gets you used to the idea that like I was saying before, when you put these words out, you don't know who the audience is going to be, but you have to like be able to stand behind it.
Did you at any point just say, like our mantra for this writing workshop since COVID started 2 years ago is hashtag I'm a writer. What point did you actually say, I'm a writer, I'm going to do this?
That's a good question. I definitely knew I wanted to be a writer pretty early. I had an English teacher. One of my best friends in high school is a guy named Guy Shipley. And we both had this cool English teacher in sophomore year who said, I'll give you the class period to finish up your paper that's due that day. So it's not a good example for everybody, but we would like kind of take pride in not starting the paper until the beginning of class. And so we would go in there with a blank page and see who would get the better grade of not having written anything and just write the paper in 40 minutes, you know?
Wow.
And of course you think about it, you know, like you're not, I honestly believe that procrastination is a productive thing. Like sometimes, you know, like a process has to take time to come out, but when the deadline hits, you got to just put it on the paper, right? So, so we'd be thinking about the topic, but then we would go into class and write in 42 minutes or however long until the bell rings, and then you turn the paper in. You know, these were handwritten on notebooks, so we didn't have to deal with like typewriters and word processors and stuff. And things like that were definitely like, it built a muscle in my brain of like, you know, understanding there's a beginning, middle, and end, and you have to like kind of get over your writer's block and just make sure you have something to turn in when the bell rings.
You know, I see you, Campari, I see you, MJ, in Japan. Just know that we will get to questions. I want to encourage folks to actually ask Rob questions directly. I see the questions coming in already. Chat is lit, Rob, based on what you're saying. Music. You know, you talked about the impact of your siblings on you when you were younger. And then also you, at some point, you became a fan of and a DJ as well of reggae music. So you were digesting a whole range of music as well. How did that shape you as a writer, just this love of music in general?
Music is a limitless universe and inspiration for me. Like there's a song by a rock and roll band called Boston called More Than a Feeling. And in the song, they say, I hide in my music, forget the day. I definitely did that many times. Like music would be a place you put on the headphones and you can just go anywhere, zone out. And music, especially like listening to, I'm a Caucasian male from California, moved around the world. At the time I got really into reggae, I was living in Baltimore, Maryland, going to a mostly white private school. There was 2 Black kids in our class of 45. I didn't have a lot of contact with, Jamaican culture, but I listened to the music on the Harder They Come soundtrack and Bob Marley's, Peter Tosh's, Jimmy Cliff's, Toots and the Maytals, all those great artists. And I expanded my horizons. I expanded my imagination. I learned different languages. I learned lessons about life and things that I would not understand how true they were until much later, after experience caught up with things I had heard in songs, so music is a really powerful way to connect, and it's really writing also. It's poetry, right? It's a poetry set to rhythm and melody. So it's all kind of a related art form for me, but I hope that like things that I write or even things that I edit, I try to make the language have rhythm, so that like it sounds good spoken aloud. Like when you read something aloud, I think that's an important part of the editing process. Kevin, you remember we would do that, especially with like, headlines, decks, and opening paragraph, closing paragraph, or just any passage that you're having problem. This isn't quite working. We would read it aloud because, like I said before, it has to make sense to someone that's not in your head. They have to be able to pick it up and get the meaning that you're trying to put across. So anyway, music all the day long.
And it's interesting because you mentioned, you've mentioned now Baltimore, Chicago, California, Ireland, and the inspiration that came from Jamaica and the West Indies. Last week, Lauren Sanders talked about the importance of writers having empathy. Does it help when you have those kind of broad cultural experiences to develop that empathy, you feel, for others, for people?
Yeah, for sure it does. Mm-hmm. For sure it does. I think when I made my first trip to Jamaica, that was in 1985 to go to Reggae Sun Splash at that time. Me and my friend Ronnie Patterson from high school, one of the 2 Black guys in high school, we both went to Jamaica together. And that experience taught me a lot about, so many things. Most of all, it was like proof that God exists, right? Like just seeing the natural beauty of Jamaica, I was like, oh, there is definitely a God, and I'd been in like cathedrals and I'd seen things, that were grand and beyond human creation, but like seeing the ancient rainforest in Jamaica, and just completely solidified my spiritual belief. And this is somebody that I was an altar boy, in Catholic church and everything, but it was like going to Jamaica that made me know that God exists. And also seeing, just the people that I contacted in that trip. So yeah, but empathy, like that's a word that I think about a lot. I do try to develop my empathy. Empathy to me means that you're not just sort of like observing people and thinking, wow, that must be great or that must be hard, but like that you actually try to feel something, to almost walk in their shoes. And it's something that you have to work at, I think, empathy, and strip away your own ego and your own preconceived ideas and try to be as open as possible to, whatever connection is there. But yeah, empathy is very powerful skill when you're writing.
So your life, you became a journalist. You've been. Can you talk about some of the places that you've worked at, that you've written for, and some of the pieces that you're most proud of? Including your years at Vibe. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing with
Sure.
us.
Yeah, of course. Well, that you've already got my resume. I was at Art and Antiques. I did a couple of things. I mean, I was there for several years. From I came to New York in '87. So from '87 to '92, I was at Art and Antiques, and in that time, I ended up going from editorial assistant to editor in chief. As it turned out, the person who had hired me ended up contracting HIV, and he retired. And at the time, the magazine had just been bought out by new people that Jeffrey Scher, rest in peace, the editor, didn't feel were good owners. He didn't think they were going to, take good care of this magazine that he was so proud of and had worked so passionately on. So he appointed me editor-in-chief very young, as a kind of gatekeeper, caretaker, like keep the barbarians away from the gate kind of thing. Like these new owners were trying to dumb it way down. And so that was my role. But yeah, I was proud of like some of the art and antique stuff I was very proud of. Like I did a cover story on the first photograph. Like photography was always really interesting to me. And so on the 150th anniversary of the first photograph ever being made, I had the idea of writing about that photo and what it meant and how photography impacted painting and other art forms. And then we also commissioned great living photographers to do like their version of the first photograph, which was kind of a cool project to work on. So I had a lot of fun there. But the stuff at Vibe, I was editing more than I was writing. I edited a lot of your cover stories. I edited the section called Start in the beginning, which was like the news section. And that got me to work with, like, I had kind of a canvas to work with all kinds of cool writers. So, I mentioned like Greg Tate and, great inspirational people like that. And also up and coming writers who were getting their first shot. It was a whole range of great talent that passed through Vibe. So that was fun. But I guess for cover stories and big stories like that, I did the Sean Paul cover, first ever dancehall artist on the cover of Vibe. So that was a moment. And I did a cover story on Nas at a pivotal moment soon after the Ether record came out and just after his mother had passed. And so it was kind of a intense time for Nas. And I remember that interview very well and how hard I worked to try to do it justice.
Wow. And folks, to put it in context with Vibe, Rob is very humble, very modest, but I mean, to say that he's a gifted editor would be an understatement. I mean, but I guess one of the questions that came to mind as you were talking, how did you navigate, or how have you navigated? Because not a lot of people can say they can edit and write. They can do both. A lot of times people pick one. How have you navigated the two worlds, going back and forth?
I wouldn't want to only do one because it's totally different experience. But like I said, I think any writer can be an editor for another writer. The main thing is that you just need to be able to trust who you're giving your draft to.
Yeah.
Right. Because it takes a lot of courage to it's like you expose yourself with that first draft and everything that people have been saying, like the Goldberg rules, which I dropped in the chat earlier, is like, just keep your handwriting and just put down whatever. Like there is an element of that you have to just like get over your writer's block and put it down. But then that first moment where you turn it over takes a lot of courage to trust someone, and if they're an asshole about it, they can really mess up the story. They can mess up your psyche. And, so you have to really trust the person that you're giving that rough draft to. I believe the essence of writing is actually rewriting. Okay. So, someone said in the chat, just put whatever down, but then go back and revise it, but make sure you revise it. And I would definitely underscore the make sure you revise it part. You have to be able to stand behind it when it finally is out publicly, right? And and right now we're in this Zoom meeting of writers, so this is, like Kevin said, it's a safe space. But once it goes into the unsafe space, and everybody is free to have at it and give their 2 cents, especially in this era of social media, you get instant feedback, right? So sometimes from people that didn't even read the story properly. So you have to be able to stand by it. And that involves rewriting. It involves trusting your editor and, going back and forth. And, you know, and right now we're in this Zoom meeting of writers, so this is, like Kevin said, it's a safe space. But once it goes into the unsafe space, and everybody is free to have at it and give their 2 cents, especially in this era of social media, you get instant feedback, right? So sometimes from people that didn't even read the story properly. So you have to be able to stand by it and that involves rewriting. It involves trusting your editor and you know, as an editor, my thing is I try not to rewrite people's stuff. I rarely do that. And if I see a suggested rewrite, I would prefer to put like long notes in the document, which Kevin, you've received things like that from me.
Yes.
And instead of like saying it should be like this, say, do you think you might want to try making this more first person, or would you like to bring in that other interview that you did here, or can we cite an example of this? And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of old slogans for writers that always hold true: show and don't tell. You know, if you can kill, have you ever heard the saying, kill your darlings? It sounds really brutal, but it's, you know, sometimes we as writers, we get like hung up on a side topic in the story, you know, something that we're very fond of, and we almost distract ourselves with it, and we might spend a lot of time adding it, and then suddenly when you step back and like turn it over to somebody else, they say, well, this isn't really, this is cool, like save it for another time, but this is not the central point of this story, and we need to kill that darling for now and, you know, get on with the point. So it's stuff like that that the editor will bring, you know, just by being like an objective, you know, second fresh pair of eyes. Because sometimes you just live with the story too long and you can't see it anymore. You need to either, if you don't have an editor you trust, I would suggest put it in a drawer and forget about it for a day or two, let it cool off, and then go back and read it out loud. You know, sometimes by reading it out loud, you hear it differently than reading it in your mind.
Yes.
But it's all about just like seeing it fresh and realizing, oh, I meant this, but now I see what I wrote is maybe not going to clearly convey that to a reader who's coming to it for the first time.
Whether you're answering the question as a writer or an editor, Rob, how do you know when you have a good editor, and how do you know when you have a bad editor?
That is a question born of experience, Kevin, isn't it?
Okay.
I'm speculating here, but I have a feeling, you know, we've had all different kinds, both of us.
Mm-hmm.
The good editor is the one who starts, the first words of feedback are words of reinforcement, gratitude, positivity. You know, even if there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be fixed, you know, acknowledge that this person has run a marathon and delivered something to you, and, you know, just honor that first and foremost, right? And then the second part of honoring it is that you don't just randomly start rewriting their shit or change the meaning of what they meant to say. Or
can you repeat that part about randomly changing their what?
Don't rewrite another writer's work. It's got their name on it, and it's not, you know, as the editor, even if you feel in the back of your mind, like, if it's not the way I want it to be, we're not going to publish it, you still have to like honor the fact that this writer's name is on the story. This writer interviewed the people that they interviewed, or had the thoughts that this op-ed or essay, you know, this is coming from this person. So if I disagree, or if I am confused or something, you know, I'm going to ask questions. I'm not going to just go in there and start slapping my thoughts all over it, because that's not what an editor really is there to do. The editor is there to help untangle all these ideas with the writer and like streamline it in a way that the reader can follow clearly. You know, that's the whole thing, is like I said in the beginning, like you're putting these marks on a page and someone has to come along and decipher them and then have the spark in their brain that you had when you were writing it. You know, that can be a very challenging thing.
You know, and I need to acknowledge Rob's talent publicly, y'all. So there's two pieces, and he and I did work on a lot of pieces together at Vibe. He's absolutely right. So many that I had forgotten, Rob. Literally been pulling stuff out, working on another project right now. But when the famous interview with Tupac Shakur in prison, Rob Kenner was my editor for that piece. And you can imagine Tupac's in jail now. And I got this interview exclusively. We got this interview, and I have to bring this raw transcript back. And Rob and I, and Tupac's naming names, all kinds of crazy stuff is going on, as Rob recalls. Yeah. You know, we don't have to get into all of the stuff that happened there, but what I remember distinctly was his gift in helping me to see, here's the meat of what we need to get out there. And it became one of the most talked about issues we ever had with Vibe magazine. And the second one was when the famous cover story, like I said, it's live from death row. Tupac and Suge and Dre and Snoop on the cover. Rob, you remember, I literally had to fly to California from New York to the set of the California Love video. I spent like maybe 2 days in California. I had to come all the way back to New York, and Rob and I sat there in the office, if I remember correctly, the wee hours of the morning, or on the phone, or both, some combination of it. And we had to turn that Live from Death Row piece around. And again, by this point, it's now this explosion happening with East Coast, West Coast. We're like, how do we put this all together? And that, for whatever reason, that became one of the articles. That article includes the famous moment when I'm with Suge Knight in his office and the dog is there, and it's just wild. And I remember, Rob, we had
Damu, right?
Damu, exactly. And the way we ended up editing the piece, because of Rob's gift as an editor, it's like it almost felt like fiction. So it was like, we have to write this like this is a story. It's like, because it was so surreal what was going on. That's great editing. But to Rob's point, your point, Rob, we both, I'm sure, have had editors that literally changed our words around, and we're like, that's not what I wrote at all. And so I just want to say thank you. And you make me think of the editor. If anyone can look it up real quick while we're talking to Rob Kinner here, but Toni Morrison had an editor for most of her career who did the same thing with her. I can't think of his name, but he was at Random House, an older gentleman. I'm not even sure if he's still alive now, but he's in the documentary, The Pieces I Am, with Toni Morrison. And, you know, the same spirit, like, do you feel that an editor's job, I guess, is to protect a writer's voice and to make sure that, you know, at the end of the day, that they feel like they've done their best with the work they've put out there?
100%. And it's really a bond of trust between the writer and the editor. And sometimes you're almost, as, I don't know, for me, I'm a bit of a rebellious person, I guess. You know, I like reggae and stuff like that. But, you know, I would feel sometimes it was like me and the writer against the powers that be sometimes, because there were always these different forces, right? Even within the publication, certainly outside industry forces that all want to have influence over what is going to be said. You know, there's ad sales people that want to sell ads to the record label. There's circulation people and publishers that want to put numbers on the board with the newsstand sales. There's, you know, publicists that want to get in there and make sure their client gets like certain sound bites or things kept out of it. And, you know, we don't actually do the job of journalists to be friends with the industry, right? We do it to tell truth and support real artists and like keep our oath to the readers that we're telling, you know, we're keeping it 100. So that takes a, you know, a unified front, you know, and you do have to protect the voice. And my biggest compliment that I ever hear from any writer who I've worked with is when they went into the last round of edits, and let's say the story is still like 6,427 words and it has to be 2,500 words. And, you know, I will like tactfully mention that in the beginning of the edit. And sometimes the writer's like, oh, fuck that. There's no way, you got to get more space. Can't do it. You know, I need a part 2, or, you know, tell them to print more pages. You know, we would go through that process. But sometimes it really just does have to go down to 2,500 words. And the biggest compliment is when the writer sees the final thing and goes, I can't even remember what you took out, you know, and that's the challenge. And that's like when I feel like I've done it, you know, done my job well.
Rob, I'm going to go to questions from folks in a second, but I got to ask you, we talked about the editor piece for a minute, and I'm going to lead this into the Nipsey Hussle piece, book, pardon me, that biography that you did, which is a New York Times bestseller. And if y'all haven't read it, it's an excellent, excellent piece of writing, because I feel like it brings together everything you've been talking about. It brings together the musicality, the poetry, your journalism background, your reporting skills, all of it. What would you say needs to be in the toolbox of a writer if they're going to become an excellent writer, a great writer? What needs to be in a writer's toolbox?
Well, there's so many different kinds of writing, right? We've been talking mostly about music journalism, and that was the skill that you and me like really developed in our work at Vibe. And, you know, Nipsey is very much in the tradition of the work that we did at Vibe, that book, The Marathon Don't Stop. But, you know, a writer could be a poet, could be an essayist, could be a restaurant critic, or a, you know, someone that goes on walks and picks up leaves and arranges them in artful patterns and writes about it. You know, it could be anything. And so I think really what a writer most of all has to possess is just a distinctive voice, you know, that is their own. And sometimes you develop a voice by reading other writers that inspire you and you imitate their voice, but eventually you come to your own voice. And those are the writers who we continue to read, and the writers who leave an impression is when there's like a real authentic voice behind whatever they're doing.
When do you feel you came to your voice? How early did it happen for you? Or when did it happen?
That's a good question, man. I'm really happy with the work we did at Vibe. When I go back and read those articles, sometimes I ask myself, wow, am I still writing as well now as I was then? You know, because we were doing a high level of work there. We had also stuff that modern website writers just do not have anymore. We had, you know, fact checkers, we had proofreaders, we had multiple editors that would look at page proofs and give us feedback. And, you know, sometimes, you know, you don't realize how blessed you are until those things are all taken away, you know. So, you know, we were really in an amazing environment to do great work. But I think I had my voice from the early stuff at Art and Antiques, honestly. Like, that's when I was publishing. You know, it's like I said, you have to be able to stand behind your stuff. But I don't know, like I always had a confidence. Like I said, I would write my papers in English class starting at the first bell and finish at the end. So I guess, you know, seeing my dad write books gave me a little more confidence than if I hadn't had that experience. But, you know, when I was really writing about reggae and hip hop and the music I loved, that was when the authentic voice that I consider my voice today came out. So I would say, yeah, the Vibe years was really the.
You know, I have to ask this question as well. And I see you, Sandra Lima, I'm coming to you in a second. You've literally lived through the technological revolution that has affected writing.
Yeah.
And what I don't know how to ask this question. You know, how has it helped us as writers, and what do we need to hold on to that technology is kind of, I don't know how to phrase it, Rob. Like, what are your thoughts about what all the changes and how it has affected us?
I really think about this stuff a lot. I personally almost messed up my Nipsey Hussle book by trying to do it all on the computer. I reached a point where, I don't know, do you know that thing that happens on a Macintosh? There's like a certain button that you hit by accident, and suddenly all the tabs and all the windows that you have open suddenly explode into this mosaic of like tiny rows of rectangles, and there'll be like 144 of them. And like, when you get to that point of research, because you care so much about finding out every detail and every fact and tracking down every obscure reference, and, you know, Nip put a lot into his work, and then his life is a culmination of so many forces of society. And, you know, there was so many things to be responsible for in that book. And I tracked down every single one of them, you know, and I ended up having to push the deadline of that book twice, which is not an easy thing to do with a book publisher. You know that they don't like that, to put it mildly, Kevin. And you take a risk in saying, the book's not ready yet, guys. I know I said it would be, but it's not ready. It's not where I need it to be, because I need to stand behind this, like really stand behind this. So I almost like really got lost in all those tabs and windows and transcripts, you know, and I always transcribe my own stuff. I hate to send it out to be transcribed. I reached a point where I had to a little bit for certain things, but like the big interviews, I had to do them myself. And anyway, it wasn't until I took paper and a pen and I started just writing a very top line outline, which ended up being a stack of paper, like, you know, probably 50 pages, that I was able to find my way through the maze, you know? So like the medium that you're using, it makes a big difference. And I remember I had an English professor at University of Chicago, a great writer named Wayne Booth, and he called a word processor word prolixer. Prolix is a word that means like unnecessarily wordy and full of extra shit. And, you know, that's what word processors can be. I'll give you another example. The great Bones Malone, who you know very well, one of the distinctive prose stylists of hip hop, and someone I had the privilege of meeting on the first day of Vibe, and edited his column Sticks and Stones and Tough Street and cover stories that he wrote. For those of you who've seen the movie Slam with Saul Williams, where the incarcerated poet is writing things, that was actually, Bones plays a role in that film, but that film is actually based on Bones's real experience. Like he wrote a cover story on LL Cool J for Vibe while he was on Rikers Island. He was mailing the edits back and forth to me at Vibe. Like these are things that really happen. And with Bones, it was only when he hand wrote the stories that they came in crisp and clean. And his manuscripts were unbelievable because he was a graffiti writer. So his handwriting was perfect, and everything was like, if he made a mistake, he never crossed it out. He had a little symbol that meant like, ignore that last word, and then picks up, and it was just perfectly clean pages. And then I would retype them, and then we would edit them. But like at a certain point, I said, Bones, if I could get you a computer, maybe we could like step it up, because he had a lot of things he wanted to do, and he was very ambitious to get his stuff out like everybody, like we all were, right? So I got him a computer. I had Keith Clinkscales scrounge up a computer that Bones wouldn't have to pay money for, and and we gave him that computer, and I'll tell you, it was not good for his craft. It didn't suit him. And like a lot of us, I do the same thing. When I start, like my process, it'll be like, I'll have just like a garbage document. I think of it, I'm just dumping all the info on the topic, right? Cut and paste things, scraps of notes. And it starts to get to be like 20, 30, 40 pages long. And you start to forget what's in there, and you lose track of the thread. And, and it happens to everybody. But I think, you have to find a medium that works for you. The great Russian novelist, Vladimir Nabokov, who wrote, Lolita's a famous novel he wrote, but he wrote so many amazing things. He always wrote on index cards. So he would have like a box of like 3x5 lined index cards. And you can actually, I was looking this up because I knew we were going to be talking. I'm going to drop it in the chat. You can check out a picture of some of his index cards, but that was just something that worked for him, And it's just like his unit of attention was the sentence. So he just wanted to make every sentence amazing. And then he would sometimes rearrange the index cards. It's a different way of working. Everybody has their own way. But I think computers and technology do not necessarily help writers. It makes it easier to do research. Google certainly does, but you have to know the real things from the BS, and you have to find a way to back it up. You don't want to just believe it because you saw it on the internet,
It's deep what you're saying about Nabokov, but also Toni Morrison hand wrote a lot of her stuff.
Yep.
And there's Tupac letters out there forever that he hand wrote, to people.
Yeah.
There's something to that because it's in a different form. Sandra, Joyce, Lajira are going to ask the first questions. Hey, Sandra. Paul, thank you for your patience, everyone.
Good evening, everybody. And Kevin, thank you for having me again and hosting this. And
thank you.
I feel so grateful to have found this community to help me develop my craft. And Rob, thank you for coming along today and sharing all of your insight with us.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. You're really speaking to me, about this writing being a solitary experience and having an empathy for others and standing behind what you write. I'm currently working on my first novel, which I've put on the back burner for decades. And I'm about now 11 chapters in, and
wow.
I am.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's a work in progress. And as I'm writing, I'm very mindful of the experience and backgrounds of other people. And I'm afraid of one thing when I'm writing. I'm afraid I'm going to be hurting the reader in some way, insulting them, not intentionally. The reason I say that is because my story is fiction, but it's based on, loosely based on some personal life experiences of mine. And the story is set back in the 1970s when things were not politically correct. You know, it was the era of Archie Bunker and the Jeffersons, and
Yes.
you know, and people said what was on their mind without worrying so much about a repercussion, and it was out there. And my main character is reflective of that era and reflective of how he was raised, you know, by his parents who were, you know, their previous generation. So I guess I'm kind of tiptoeing around this, saying these are my words that I'm penning here, and they're not necessarily my feelings or my beliefs, but they are my main character's feelings and beliefs. So how do I get beyond this fear that I'm going to hurt the reader in some way, but still stay true to my craft and my character development?
Can I ask you a question, Sandra?
Mm-hmm.
Are you writing fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction.
I think you just have to let it rock. Fiction, you know, you can tell more truth in fiction than in nonfiction, honestly. I think, you know, you always have a little more journalistic responsibility when it's nonfiction, and people need the right to be able to rebut your statements or what's your comment to this, and you know, you have to be fair and balanced. But with fiction, you know, you're not responsible for, as long as, I don't know, like, you're responsible for the work, but don't overthink too much what the audience reaction is going to be. Just be true to what you're trying to do. And like I said earlier, you don't know the audience really. You can't predict. You have to let it go. And so don't be irresponsible, but you know, don't censor the voices if they're saying ugly things. That's a reflection of the truth that shaped them to say those things, and that is probably part of what you're trying to get to.
Yes,
right?
exactly. So, yes.
Yeah, you're not responsible to, like, you know, censor or sanitize the things that the characters are saying in your story. Just hopefully it all builds to a larger point. Why you're going through whatever these dialogues are, that, you know, we're gonna come to some understanding of what is, you know, motivating them.
Yes. And I had a second part of the question, Rob, if that's okay. Where you've done some film making yourself.
A little bit of documentary stuff, yeah.
When I'm writing my novel, because it's such a heavy topic that I'm writing about, I am interjecting it with a lot of pop culture references, including a lot of music and lyrics. And I have this idea that I am writing this, and even my husband said it sounds almost like you're writing a screenplay. And I wanted the book to be easily adapted to a screenplay. Do I finish the book first, the novel first, and then write a screenplay after? Or
I don't know. That's more in the, like, talk to your agent category of things, or, you know,
I don't have an agent.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, that's more like career advice. But I think, you know, just follow through. One thing I will say, if you're putting song lyrics into something that you plan to publish, I learned working on the Nipsey Hussle book that, you know, when we were doing magazine journalism, we could quote any lyrics in the context of our story. But when you're doing a book, if you put too many lyrics in that book, you have to pay publishing on that. You have to get permission to use the lyrics. So that's a word of caution to anybody that's doing a book as opposed to music journalism.
That's what I was thinking I would probably have to do. So I may have to cut some of that out.
Right. I ended up cutting all the quotes of lyrics in the Marathon Don't Stop down to very, you know, short, and we're weaving them into the context of the story that was being told. And that was the, you know, the basis of what is called fair use as a journalist.
Fair use.
But if you're just printing long chunks of a song, that then becomes a little different. And, you know, you have to know where the line is and respect the author of those lyrics and not just be completely reprinting their stuff, you know?
Yeah, even if you're referencing them in the process, if you're mentioning their
Yeah,
name.
no, it doesn't matter if you reference it.
Okay.
You gotta, it's
Okay.
gotta be integral to the writing that you're doing and
Okay.
and support the idea that you're trying to get across, not just here's a bunch of lyrics from, you know,
Right.
whichever songwriter, you know.
Yep. Okay, gotcha. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. Hey, Joyce. Hey,
Thank you.
Lajara. Here, EMJ in Japan. Joyce, please.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hello.
And thank you, Rob, for all of the insights and information you've shared thus far. Super helpful.
My pleasure.
You talked about authentic voice, and in a time where there's so much external noise and chatter, and people tend to overspeak you or outspeak you or convince you that or dismiss you even, that your voice or what you have to say is not even worthy. It could become disruptive to your own journey. So my question to you is, how do you know when you've found your authentic voice and who actually authenticates your voice?
Oh, these are tough ones. Very good question. I mean, Kevin has always had an authentic voice since I first began working with him. And
thank you.
His work, when you see, like, one of the things that I find amazing that Kevin has the ability to do, which I rarely can pull off, is when something really big happens in the world, you'll see Kevin will pop up on Washington Post or some major platform with like a very quick and very thoughtful and, you know, well-written and personal opinion about this thing that everybody's talking about, right? You know, Twitter's going crazy about it. It's on cable news. It's in everybody's cell phone. And to cut out that noise, you know, Joyce, like you were saying, there's so many voices contradicting and saying, no, you're stupid. And, you know, all that stuff. And Kevin is able to just like put blinders on and zone in and write about something like the piece he did when Greg Tate passed, you know, like, and I mean, that was, I still haven't been able to finish my Greg Tate piece. And I started working on it a while, you know, probably around the same time you were writing yours. And I just, you know, I get lost in these big topics sometimes, but you know, you found your voice when it feels real and true to you. That's it. You're the only one who authenticates it. And then you get extra reinforcement from the people who read you and say, you know, I want to hear another piece from Joyce. You know, I want to hear what Joyce has to say about this other thing because you did that so well. Please, let's hear what you want to say about that. But you're the one that authenticates it, and I'm pretty sure, Kevin, you would agree with that. Like, I don't know if somebody told you at a certain point you can be a writer now, but I know you were a writer when I first met you. You were already publishing your work.
It was, yeah. It was. I'm trying not to answer the questions. I want Rob to answer the questions, but you have to keep writing to find your voice, you know, and you got to trust your voice. I think that's important, just really important. And you will imitate people in the beginning. I think a lot of us, you know, Rob, please talk about, like, did you feel like you were sounding like your influences in the beginning?
Oh,
you know,
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think everybody that reads certain people, like we've mentioned Greg Tate a lot, and I just want to say that Greg Tate is the father to a whole school of journalism in, you know, and for those that saw it at the Grammy Awards, it was so great to see him honored in the section where people who had passed this year. And, you know, he was a great musician and he played a mean guitar with the Burnt Sugar Orchestra, but it was primarily for me, you know, and Black Rock Coalition, but I see him as a writer first and foremost. And, you know, the way that his writing would mirror the energy of hip hop, you know, or jazz or, you know, funk, or, you know, like he could actually make music on the page. And so that's a voice. Like, if you want to read a voice, like pick up Flyboy and the Buttermilk. If you haven't read that book, just pick it up, just dip in anywhere, open it at random, get that book, read that book. He's the father to many people's style. And it's funny, one of the parts of the Greg Tate appreciation that I hope to publish one day, there's one of our colleagues who was listed. There was a Michael Gonzalez, my good friend, our good friend and colleague, Michael A. Gonzalez, wrote a piece while Greg was living where he was like, without Greg, we wouldn't have da 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 da, and made a long list of great hip hop journalists who were publishing in Vibe and Source and Village Voice at the time, and Rap Pages and other publications. And one of the people mentioned in that list, Chris X, he was like, I don't even read Greg like that. But then when he went back and like studied Greg's writing, he was like, well, actually, I was imitating other writers that were imitating Greg, and I didn't realize that. So like the influence kind of flows in ways that we don't always know. But Chris X is Chris X, and he's not any derivative of anything but Chris X. And the same goes for Kevin. And I try to hold that standard up, and all of us do that in our own, to the best of our abilities. But it's a daily operation. It takes a lot of discipline, and like I said, I can't say it enough, the essence of writing is rewriting and like perfecting it. And this kind of goes against having that piece ready to go at the end of the English class or the next morning on the blog. But I am definitely a perfectionist. I keep going back and back and reading things aloud, trying to get to that point where I'm like, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you. Lujiver, hey.
Hey, first of all, thank you, Rob. And
My pleasure.
I wanted to say something to Sandra about lyrics. What I decided to do, just use song titles. And that works for me because I had to go back to 75 years to use one song, and that worked.
Okay.
I did have a two-part question. First of all, do you think printing out a piece, like working on novels especially, or I mean, I haven't seen anything, but working on novels or working on short stories, printing out a piece it makes it easier to edit?
I definitely do. I used to, and this is terrible for the environment because we chopped a lot of trees down for all the things that I would print out, but it is definitely helpful for me to have it and take a pen out. Like I said, the pen, there's something about, I don't know if you've ever done this, Kevin, like when you're preparing for an interview, you'll like make a list of questions and you never look at the list. I don't look at the list, but I write the list down. I write it by hand on paper. And there's something about the act of writing with your hand that embeds it in your brain. And then you don't have to look at the list. And I think also, by the way, anyone that's going to do an interview, people hate when you're interviewing them and you're looking at a list. It just feels fake. It feels like you're being set up, or, it should be a conversation. You should be able to look the person in the eye. And the best interview questions are never the ones you prepared ahead of time. It's the follow-up question. So it's like when you're listening to the answer and then you say, oh, well, why do you say that? Or what do you mean by that? And that's when the good stuff happens. So anyway, but yeah, printing out anything you're writing, working on it, anything that allows you to like get off of that computer screen and like get your hands on it. And the word text this is something my dad, I've heard him say in lectures. Text and textile are the same root word, right? So it's like something woven with your hands, and so I think it needs to be something that you can put your hands on and get your pen out and smudge up your fingers and get down to it.
And I guess my follow-up to that is, if you don't want to kill the trees in the environment, what do you think about using a reading program like Natural Soft? I keep telling everybody to get that.
I have no idea what that is. What is that?
It's a program that you put your stuff into and it reads it back to you. And I use it sometimes because, well, first of all, I write on a black screen.
Okay.
Stay away from that white because it hurts my eyes.
Uh-huh.
But like, I don't want to print something, but I need to work on it so I can sit and listen to it.
Okay. So the computer reads it back to you.
Yeah, I don't use, it's a computer program, but it's not, it's not directly from the computer. It's, because Microsoft does that too, but I don't like their reading. But Naturalsoft works for me because I can just hear it, and you find all those dumb mistakes like,
oh, for sure.
You left out the D from and, or, little dumb.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of reading stuff aloud for sure. If you can't have somebody sit there and read your whole novel to you, then yeah, having a computer do it. This is the thing again about having a good editor and trusting that editor. And and I have to shout out, by the way, my editor on the Nipsey Hussle book, because I put her through hell. Michelle Herrera Mulligan fought for me to push the book back twice, and then I didn't give her a lot of time to do her edit. I got to be honest. I used up every drop of time, and she did a beautiful job with it. And I like I say for my own edits, I can't even remember what she took out. But yeah, I didn't have a chance to sit with her and have her read it aloud to me. I would have enjoyed that, but it probably would have been excruciating also. And I think you got to just trust the person that you're handing it over to. But yeah, as long as the computer voice isn't too weird and like robotic, and you can actually feel what's being read, then it sounds like a good solution, and save some trees, which would be good also.
Thank you, Lajara. Thank you. MJ in Japan. Shout out to Japan. Hey.
Oh man, I just feel, first of all, very blessed and grateful to be in this space with all of y'all, because this is like a master class. This is expediting a lot of things that I had on my mind and my heart, hearing all your questions and hearing you talk. So first, thank you again, Rob, for Instagram is powerful. I reached out to you and you got back immediately. That's big to me. Thank you for this, because I would have never known about this if I hadn't reached out to you.
Awesome.
My first question is for you, which is, God rest your father's soul, bless him.
Thanks.
What are some things that he said or that he taught you, both directly and indirectly, that resonated with you, that stuck with you from everything that he exposed you to, that you use today, that are powerful and possibly even transformative?
I love that question, MJ. Thank you. I put one in the book on the page after I dedicated it to my father. Something he said all the time. Time is now passing. The moments are fleeting, passing from you and from me. And that's it. Like time is not, tomorrow is not promised. And I said before, when you sit in that chair and you put on some music on repeat, and you trick yourself because some part of you is like, I don't want to sit in this chair for all these hours. And, it's a nice day out. I could be doing any number of things, but, we sacrifice our time because we believe this is important, what we're doing. And like I said before, we're leaving footprints on the sands of time. So if you do something that you can really stand behind and, you can get it published where people can read it, after you're gone, they might still be able to hear your voice, so that's a pretty cool thing. And, so life is short and art is longer than life, so if we can create a work of art or a piece of writing that touches somebody, that's a cool way to stick around after the flesh is gone.
I love it. And I got something else. So I'm shameless with this. I always take advantage of time and opportunity. I got you and Kevin here at the same time. When I write what I'm writing, I'm gonna pull at you guys. I'm gonna tug on you a lot, because I think I have a lot of stories that need to be heard, particularly with this one. And
do that.
Just know it's coming. It's coming.
I'm gonna hold you to that, MJ.
Okay, for sure. Right. It's gonna be incessant. And Kevin, you said you want to come out here again. Come out, bro. Like, come out. Like, I'll show you some stuff. You too, Rob, if you want to come.
Which part of Japan are you in? Where are you?
I'm in Yokohama. So like that's like an hour and 10 minutes away from Tokyo, Shinjuku, Roppongi, and many other spots. My uncle, which I'm gonna write part of my piece about, lived in Osaka for like 26 years. Okay.
Wow.
And like Well, the first time I came to Japan, I was 16 years old. I used to get in a little bit of trouble in Southern California, where I'm from. Like you guys can imagine, this is why hustle resonates with me at a whole different level. Like my family sent me to Japan to like get away from the polarities of different friends that I had and spending time with my uncle, because he was of a certain lifestyle too, like warped my mind like on a whole different level. I don't want to take away too much time.
No, this is great. This is great. I've never been to Japan. I would love to take you up on that one day. And what you just said reminded me of a chapter in the Marathon Don't Stop titled Eritrea, where basically young Nip, Ermias Askadom and his brother Samil Askadom get taken from Los Angeles, where both of them were born. Their dad said, I want my sons to see a different way of life, because, especially Ermias was starting to get caught up in things that his dad was not super excited about and was worried about. And he said, we're going to go see our family in East Africa. And they went, and Nipsey had a lot of things going on at the time. He didn't want to leave. And he was like, wow, 3 months is a long time. But he went, and it changed his life. And Nipsey told me about that in our last conversation. And so it was a very powerful thing to get out of where maybe some people think the whole world is the world they've seen, and they don't realize that this is a whole big world, and there's a lot of different ways to be and live. And so I don't know if that touched you, MJ, but
it definitely does, like directly, which is funny, because now you're connecting more. So how I got my introduction to Nipsey is funny. Like I had a kid, I worked at a school, at an opportunity school, like a lot of disadvantaged kids. And the way that I connected with them was, at the time I was a teacher's assistant. That's not the term that I had, but let's call it that, right? Mm-hmm. And this kid came in, he knows MJ. I used to spit bars, I used to do shows. I had a lot of influence in different communities as a result of that, in the places that I've been, of living in so many different cities in Southern California, because it happens when you're poor, you know what I mean? Like, so this kid ran up on me, yo, Mr. J, I heard you spit those bars the other day. Like, yo, you go down to the J's? Yeah, I'll be in the J's sometimes. You ever go down to Nicholson Garden? Yeah, I'll be out there too. Have you heard of this guy? And I'm like, who's this guy? He gives me this gold CD, I'll never forget it. And he wrote on it, and it said Nipsey Hussle. I said, man, that name sounds familiar, but I don't know. Let me listen to it. And this kid put like, I want to say 25 songs on a CD. And I'm sitting here listening to it like, oh my gosh, this dude is the truth. And my brother also raps. My brother did a show with like Ghostface, Raekwon, the late Guru, like a lot of people like back in the day. So like, I go to the house real quick after school, meeting with this kid. I said, yo, Freddie J, you got to listen to this, bro. And he's like, okay, tell me about it. Because my brother's like hypercritical when it comes to music. And he's like, I said, this dude bangs, and he was like, nah, I'm not even, he was in one of his moods. I'm not even trying to hear that right now. And I was like, no, like you got to listen to it. Fast forward, after my brother's first time kind of like hating, not giving it a chance, he does a show with Nip Hussle at the Griffith Auditorium. Oh, wow. In Orange County. You know what I'm saying? Like, and he spit over Fly Crippin'. There's a song called Fly Crippin'. He took the beat, and then he spit Fly Spittin' right in front of Nip. And Nip was like, oh my gosh, like, this is dope. Like, who are you? Like, who are you? Like, they had this moment. And it's funny.
You got to write this story, MJ. You got to write this down, man.
Exactly.
I got a lot to write, man.
Yeah.
I don't want to cut you, but like, you just got to go ahead and write this one, man. It sounds like it's a whole chapter right there.
Exactly. Exactly. Rob, we have one more hand up, and
sure.
MJ, thank you so much. But I agree with Rob. You got to tell these stories because this is important. And after Leslie's question, please jump in, Leslie. You can unmute. Rob, I want to come back and just talk about the genesis of the Nipsey Hussle biography, all the way to it becoming a New York Times bestseller. Leslie, thank you for your patience.
Oh yeah, great. I mean, I'm just so happy to be here, Kevin. I've wanted to jump into your workshops. Thank you so much for making this possible for everybody. Thank you for moving them to Sunday night, because now I can, awesome. I have commitments with my daughter, and it was great to be here. And I'm actually in the middle of reading the book, Rob. So it was just so
cool,
a synergistic moment. So thank you so much. One of the things I love so much about the book, and you talk about lyrics, is, and I don't know if anybody else has read the book, and Kevin, I'm sure you have. When you write the song lyrics from different people throughout hip hop culture, that obviously, Nip must have listened to, I don't know if you knew that firsthand or you're intuitively thinking, and then you write the age that he was when that song out. And it's so fantastic because one of the things that's really hard for me about writing, because I'm writing a lot of like personal work, like personal memoir stuff and things, kind of trying to get some stuff together. And the exposition and the context is important, but it's not always really where the narrative is going or where your thought process is really going with the writing, but you still have to give it context. It's like in those old movies where they would like give the exposition line so everybody knew what was happening and then they could go into it. And it was just such a brilliant way to handle context. And it's really important. I just wondered if you thought of it that way or how you came about getting that, how did that happen? I've never seen that before.
All right, I'm so glad you asked because I definitely jacked that from one of my colleagues at Vibe. Shout out to Danielle Smith, brilliant writer. She was editor-in-chief of Vibe twice and did a lot of other great things. She has a book that's coming out this month called Shine Bright that everybody should pick up. It's about Black female artists, musicians, and kind of a very personal history of her relationship. I mean, she did cover stories at Vibe on, Beyonce, Whitney, Keisha Cole, also from Oakland, like Danielle. Anyway, Danielle challenged us. Kevin, I'm sure you would agree. She's a, very driven perfectionist also. And one of the things that she would always, hit us with a million questions. And one of them was like, okay, so in this time period, don't just say someone's like in the 80s or the 90s. It's like, what was the popular songs at the time? And what was the, evoke that era? Don't just mention the decade, and like make it real, make it specific. So that was a technique that I kind of observed by editing her work and working alongside Danielle. But it also came to mind because Nipsey was very clear about the impact that he had from like growing up in the death row era, right? He was it flows directly from the work that me and Kevin were doing, right? So like, the death row cover comes out. That is an iconic moment in pop culture. I would be bold enough to say, that cover, everybody remembers that cover. It looked like the Casino movie poster. Suge Knight actually had the idea for that cover. He approached Vibe and said, "This is how you're gonna do the cover," and we just did it.
That's a whole nother conversation for another day.
It's funny, Rob, Kevin knows this because we never did a story together, but I'm a photographer. Before I ever started writing, Kevin actually helped give me my voice when he invited me to write a piece for a Martin Luther King post. He was
God, that's right.
When he did BK Nation, but Vibe was the first editorial shoot I ever did. I shot for back for George Pitts in the 90s.
I did not know that. Well, great George Pitts, rest in peace. I pray every day that I pray, I mention George Pitts' name.
It's amazing. I mean, if you were ever in the presence of George Pitts and didn't learn something, I always said you were not paying attention for sure.
I know. Professor Pitts, who really became a professor later on in life and had students and everything. But I just want to say in closing, and this will dovetail into the thing that Kevin, you want to talk about the Nipsey book, but Nipsey grew up, he was born in 1985, but he knew he wanted to rap by age, 7, maybe. He wanted to be like Crisscross, and if you remember Crisscross, their first hit was Jump, right? And that was kind of like a Jermaine Dupri flip of a Dr. Dre funk sound, right? And so is that the death row era was heavy, and Nip grew up in South Central. So, he said we never had to buy a Tupac or Snoop CD. You just step outside and it's playing everywhere, So that influence was very powerful on him. And I wanted to make it clear in that first chapter that you're referring to, the first lyric is Biggie, "It Was All a Dream," and he definitely was a fan of not just LA rap. Nipsey loved all hip hop. And he had a dream to become an artist. So, I chose those lyrics specifically. The lyrics are Snoop, Biggie, and Tupac and Jay-Z, because those were names that Nipsey mentioned a lot when asked those typical questions: who's your favorite influences? And but I think Tupac would loom largest for Nip out of everybody. He of course called himself the Tupac of my generation later on in his recorded work. So but yeah, like the lyric quotes can do more than just be a lyric quote. And that's what I was saying before. It's like I try to weave it into the narrative that I'm constructing and introduce Nipsey to you as someone who at age 9 was listening to XYZ, and he was definitely listening to it all at a very young age.
Yeah, I appreciated it so much. It was fantastic. It just gave it that context to stay, the development of him, in the story.
Thanks for noticing that. I appreciate it.
That was great. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Okay, thanks so much.
Rob, you got to check out Leslie's work. Great photographer and a gifted writer. Thank you so much, Leslie.
I want to know more. DM me your stuff, or drop it in the chat for everybody.
No, the blessing, Rob, is that the Nipsey Hussle biography, and folks need to, if you don't understand who Nipsey Hussle is, I mean, we've heard us mention Tupac Shakur's name a lot here today because of Rob and I connection, writing, working on all those cover stories on Tupac at Vibe. But in a lot of ways, Nipsey actualized what Tupac was talking about in terms of business, his relationship with the community, building things, literally. The blessing was that it ended up being a New York Times bestseller list, but you talked about how you struggled with the book. You had to push back the deadline twice. Can you just quickly take us through the process, and why did you decide to do a book about Nipsey in the first place?
Wow. So happy to have the opportunity to talk about this with you. So yeah, Nipsey came to Vibe to play as his mixtape in 2009. At the time, I had never heard of Nipsey Hussle. This was in the last year Vibe was still publishing in print. Due to the financial meltdown of 2008, 2009, we were on shaky financial ground as a business. And also, we had moved into cheaper office space down on Wall Street because Wall Street firms were folding left and right. So there's a lot of open real estate down there. So Nipsey came up to Wall Street to play his mixtape. And everybody who was there that day remembers him. He was just such an impressive individual. He had this amazing energy. He walked in the room, it was just like electric. And, he of course had the immaculate braids and he had the chain shining, and, he was proudly representing, the 60s. And, he was just like as authentic as you could be, but also spoke very thoughtfully about his East African heritage with Memsur Kamarke, who's also African, fashion director of Vibe at the time, and, had this great combo. Everybody that was in the room was impressed with this young man. But when he pressed play on the music, it was like, just took us back to the Death Row era. There was a record called Dre Jackin' for Beats on the Bull and Saint Got No Name mixtape. If you haven't listened to that lately, please do, because everybody knows Victory Lap and everybody's heard the DJ Khaled record Higher and the Jay-Z collab. This is What It Feels Like, the recent records. But go back, listen to Bullets Ain't Got No Name, listen to this record, Dre Jackin' for Beats. He's going over the Gin and Juice beat. And from what everybody in this chat knows, that's an important record. You can't be from Los Angeles and just say anything over that beat. You have to come correct. It's what we were saying about our writing. You have to be able to stand up behind that. And, he's from South Central, worse. Like something I began to really come to appreciate, especially I was born in California, but Santa Barbara is not South Central. And, New York City, where I was doing most of my journalistic practice, we had kind of a remove from LA hip hop. But one thing I really strongly came to appreciate about Nipsey Hussle, when we talk about LA rap, the names that come to mind are like NWA and, and you might mention Kendrick Lamar. You might think of, Los Angeles is a county, right? So you have Compton, you have different, Long Beach. But Los Angeles, the city, there has not been a rap star from the city of LA, from the heart of South Central before Nipsey Hussle. You know, there were rappers that, you know, that touched down in there and had a moment, but like to really stand up and defend it and be, as he said, 10 toes down in the heart of, you know, a few blocks away from where the Rodney King, you know, atrocity took place. And, you know, a lot of things, you know, like you have to be able to really stand firm and defend your position. And, you know, anyway, I didn't know all that when I started, you know, when I was impressed by Nip, but I could hear something in that music that impacted me. And I paid attention. I told him after that listening, I said, you know, we're going to give you whatever support we can, and just keep doing what you're doing. You know, you're obviously a really important artist, and I just want to hear more from you. And, you know, a couple other moments over the years, like when I was at Complex, he did that $100 mixtape, the Crenshaw mixtape, which got everybody talking, that changed the whole music game. Like at a time when no one was paying for music, he charged $100 for a free mixtape that you could download on the internet, but he believed that his fans would support his movement. So he said, come to my pop-up shop at midnight. And everybody said he was crazy. And sure enough, there was a line around the block. They sold $100,000 worth of CDs that night, $10,000 of which was from Jay-Z, who wired it because he recognized this is a brilliant businessman apart from his authenticity of his music. So, you know, I was doing stuff at Complex at the time, and Complex had kind of played themselves and dissed him a little bit shortly before that Crenshaw tape came out. So we did one of those Complex lists, the snarky list, like, you know, underachieving rappers and why hasn't he dropped in a while. And Nip was, you know, he didn't say anything, but he noticed everything. And so like he like made a mental note, oh, Complex dissed me after like I've given them interviews and shown them around my neighborhood and stuff. So then like when he put out the Crenshaw tape, the whole industry is like, oh, Nipsey Hussle. And another editor at Complex reached out to him like, oh, we love your work and we want to do an interview. He's like, fuck Complex. He tweeted, he's like, you know, 10 racks for an interview or stop emailing my management. And, you know, it's because it was hypocritical to him. Like this publication just was poking fun at why I haven't put out a tape in a while. And they don't know my reality. They don't know the reasons that I've been going through things that I couldn't put music out. So how are you going to now say, oh, we're big fans and we want to do an interview? So at that time, my role was just to say, I didn't, you know, first of all, I didn't work on that snarky list. And I, you know, but anyway, my friend Angel Diaz did the interview because I said, you know, we're going to have to find a way to just let him talk his truth. And, you know, after, you know, the conversation was finally set up, if you Google Complex Nipsey Hussle interview, it's the first thing that comes up. He was dropping so much fire in that interview and so like really separating himself from other rappers and just distinguishing like a line in the sand. Like you can't compare me to industry entertainers. You know, I'm living a truth that is so beyond the comprehension of most of these studio, you know, performers. And so that was like a moment when I was like, this is an important story. And then fast forward, Kevin, I know it's a long-winded answer, but there's a lot in my head. Victory Lap comes out. I'm at Mass Appeal at this point. I said, we got to get Nipsey Hussle in here. This album is so important. Let's do the interview. And as usual, it's like a whole process of like, whoa, is that the right thing? Maybe we should do a documentary, or maybe we should do this, or, you know, and all these different things. But I was like, let's just get him in here and let him talk, and let me talk to him. And so we had this interview. It ran like an hour plus interview, blew my mind. So many topics we touched on, and we had to like boil it down to a 5-minute YouTube video, you know? And I was just like, this is not gonna cut it, you know, it's like too much here. And so I said, you know, let's do that documentary. Let's finish, let's go back to LA and shoot more with him and do, and you know, Powers That Be didn't really want to do it. And so I was like, well, if I'm gonna just tell this story, I just have to tell it, you know? So I started preparing to write a book about him. And I
before he died, before he was killed.
Oh yeah, this is shortly after Victory Lap, because I had this like 3 days after the album came out. I had the first interview in New York with him. He came at 9:30 in the morning, earliest any rapper has ever come for any interview ever. Like I'm not, you know, and the crew at Mass Appeal was like, is he really going to be there at 9:30? I was like, just be there. We'll have the lights set up. Let's be ready. And so I just knew I had to do justice to that conversation. and like unpack all the things he was talking about business. And, you know, this is something for all the writers that want to like make a living from writing. Oh, what's that picture, man? Look at that Times Square flick. MJ. Look at
Yes,
you.
yeah. Thank you, MJ.
But like, he said something that impacted me, and this is something, Kevin, you can relate to. Like I said earlier, we didn't know what we had in the days of Vibe, when we had like a real support system and a major publishing company behind us. And now we're in this blog era, and even blogs are hard to find a decent editor at a blog these days. But, you know, he said, and he was talking about the music business, but it applied to me also as a writer, that the rules of the game, like the business, were not made by creative people. They were made by the business people, you know, who have a whole different mindset. And, you know, there's an exchange between the readers and the writers, or the artists and the listeners, whatever, that creator and the people that are tapping in. And that is a spontaneous thing that you're just going to do anyway. You're inspired. You know, artists are going to make art, writers are going to write, and the people who love that writing or love that music are going to find it somehow, you know. And it's only the business people that stand on the sideline and see that interaction and say, if we could get in between those two, we could make a lot of money off them, you know, because they're just gonna do it for the love. But anyway, what I realized is, like, now they don't call us writers, right? They call us content creators, you know. And content to me is like a hamster wheel, you know. It's just like you're running, and the wheel is spinning and you're not getting anywhere, you know. You're filling slots on a website and they get tweeted out and they do what they do. And then 5 minutes later, there's a bunch of new slots to fill. And you just got to keep filling those slots. And all this stuff we're talking about in here, the craft, the rewriting, the love and the care, and keeping the voice authentic and serving the truth and all that stuff kind of gets left out sometimes. So for writers that really want to devote themselves to the craft, you know, it takes courage, and, you know, try to be mindful of owning the relationships that you have with your readers. Like, you know, if you're doing an online blog, like, keep in touch with those people that leave comments on your blog, you know, like, build that audience. And by the time you do publish a book, or, you know, an article in another publication, you know, you're going to find that you've got a community there, and you can grow that and build that. But you know, fast forwarding, you know, while working on the book, about a year into it, of course, March 31st, 2019 happens, and Nipsey was taken away from us. And that was a horrible, horrible experience. And, you know, everybody who was paying attention to him remembers that day. It was a terrible abomination what happened. And, you know, Kevin and I have been through a lot of, you know, experiences in our years at Vibe. And, you know, of course, we mentioned that Kevin's, you know, done important reporting about Tupac, and, you know, and Biggie Smalls also was heavily covered in our pages. And so we had gone through the feeling of like losing someone we really loved and revered, and, you know, and that we're writing about and chronicling real shit that was going on in their lives. And there's a great responsibility that comes with that. And, you know, with Nipsey too, you know, that was a big challenge to finish the book at that point, not just spiritually and the sadness, but also like now the people you want to talk to are also mourning, and they're probably even more cautious about who they're going to speak to and what they're going to say. And it was a big challenge to put that book together. The most challenging thing I've ever worked on, really. And I'm just grateful to my editor, like I said, that she fought for me to have the time I needed, because the publisher doesn't necessarily see it that way. You know, they just have their schedule that they want to stick to. But I knew I had to get it right. So thank God I was able to get the time I needed. And yeah, the book came out March 23rd of 2021. And people really supported it. A lot of, you know, media coverage and just social media, like MJ, you know, people just posting on Instagram. Anybody that posts the book on Instagram stories, I always repost it, because, you know, it's like one by one. It's the same way Nipsey did with his mixtapes. You know, he had relationships with all his listeners, and I tried to emulate that in the conversation around the book. And yeah, 2 weeks after publication, it hit the New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction. So that was a huge, huge blessing. And victory for hip hop, victory for Nipsey's message and his movement, you know.
Yeah. Rob, we have to wrap up in a second, but I just want to say congratulations because, you know, you're proof that you can have a long career, even with all the changes that have happened. You know, my last question for you, you can make it as brief as possible. What would you say to your dad now if he was here, given what you've become as a writer, an editor, filmmaker, all the things that you've done? What would you say to your dad if he was here?
Wow. Thanks, Kevin. That's a tough one. I don't know if I can be brief on that. There's so many things.
Go ahead.
But I would just say thanks, Dad. And you know, I hope you like it. I hope it's worth your time to read it, you know. I didn't actually read a lot of my dad's work while he was around. He filled up bookshelves of books on topics that I wasn't very knowledgeable about. He did like specific like literary studies and things. I read some of the stuff, but you know, Dad said that God was the ultimate attention. You know, God like pays attention to everybody at all times, and you know, like there's that famous song, you know, his eyes on the sparrow. You know, it's like, so I would just say, Dad, I hope this book is worth your attention. I hope that, you know, if you can spend some time with it, you'll find something in here that touches you. But
I also meant, what would you say to him about who you've become, what you've done with your life? Because you said he was your inspiration.
It's so funny that you asked that. I actually was given a printout of an email that my dad wrote to somebody, a friend of his, who was asking about me being at a hip hop magazine. And at the time, this person was not like super fan of hip hop or didn't quite understand my decision to join Vibe. And this is another fellow writer and, you know, person that also written a lot of books and someone that was like a family friend. And my father defended me, my decision, which was not something that he made known to me. I didn't know about any of this. I got this printout after he had died in some papers that I found, but he said, he said, my son is versatile. That's what he said. So I like that. I appreciated that, Dad. Thank you for that. Even if he didn't maybe understand it either, he defended it. So I appreciate that.
Everyone, let's unmute and give a warm round of applause to Rob Kenner, who is indeed one of our most versatile writers and editors out there.
Thank you, Kevin. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. And I'll tell y'all, it's because of editors that I've had through the years, like Rob Kenner, that I learned how to ask questions without ever writing questions down, just being prepared ahead of time. Rob, thank you, brother. I love you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Woo.
Thanks for building this space and this community. It's an amazing community of writers, and it's an honor to share my story with y'all. And shout out to each and every one of you, those I know well, those I'm just seeing for the first time. I really appreciate each and every one of you listening tonight.
Thank you, Rob. And everyone, don't forget Friday Night Writes. All the details are in the chat. Also on our Facebook group, please join the Friday Night Writes. We do have to write. I think if there's several things we can take from Rob Kenner, we have to write. Rewriting is a big part of the process. And no matter what's happening in the world, we got to fight to get our words out there. That's important. And thank you in the spirit of Nipsey Hussle. Rest in peace, Nipsey Hussle and your father. We got to make sure our voices are heard. All right, y'all. Thank y'all. We'll see you next Sunday. And thank you, Brother Rob. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Kevin. Much respect. Shout out to Izzy. Good night, everybody.
All right now.
Good night, y'all.